Hello, Math 140 students. We are going to pick up on page 1. We are going to actually start in section 1.5. This is to kind of help you review for chapter 5. So in 1.5, we go over exponents, roots, and order of operations. You might remember order of operations as PEMDAS, where the P is any grouping symbol like the parentheses or the brackets or the braces, the absolute value, or the radical. E is for exponents, and it's multiplication or division, whichever one comes first, reading left to right, and addition or subtraction, whichever comes first, reading left to right. So here, you can definitely use your calculator, but what you want to pay attention to is the parentheses or lack of parentheses or any other grouping symbol. So here, I see that I have my parentheses. So that parentheses is really telling me -1 times -1. Or you can plug that into your calculator, and so your final answer there should be a +1. Now here, what this is saying is you have your negative kind of hanging out, and you have 1 squared, so that's 1 times 1. Well, 1 times 1 is 1, and you have your negative hanging off to the side. And here you want to think about this as there's a negative, and it's a -1 squared. So this part becomes positive, but don't forget that you have your negative on the outside, so you really end up with just a -1. And down below, the absolute value of 1, well, since it's the distance from 0, that's 1. And here, if I'm thinking about the distance from 0, well, -1 has a distance of 1, so 1 is going to be your answer. And here you can think of the absolute value of -1. We already have that. That was 1. But don't forget that the negative's hanging on the outside, so you actually get a -1. So notice how you're going to get either a +1 or a -1 depending on your grouping symbol. Now, it says find the square roots of the given number. So if you want to find the square root, it would mostly be the principal square root. So the square root of 36. You're thinking, what is some number squared, which is going to equal to 36? Well, we know that this number that's unknown would be 6. So 6 times 6 is equal to 36. Now for part B, if I think of -25, you want to think about, oh, well, what number squared is going to equal to a -25? What would this be? Well, we actually see that x squared cannot be possible to give you negative, so this would be a no solution. And now with the square root involving the radical sign, whenever we have a fraction, the cool thing that we can do is we can actually split the fraction. So let's look at some examples. For example, you might want to think, okay, what is the square root of 144? And you can plug that into your calculator, and so you would get that this is going to equal to a +12. It's the principal square root. I'm not really sure if your homework will want for the negative square root, but the positive is definitely called the principal square root. I'm just unsure if the homework would want the negative in Newton. So that's just something to kind of be aware of, okay? So for part B, if I have 49 and I have 81 inside the square root, well, 49 is not easily divisible in 81. So what you want to do here is, this is where you can split it. So I'm going to say the square root of 49 over the square root of 81. So now I can think of each one individually. So now I have the square root of 49, which is 7 in my numerator, and the square root of 81 in the denominator, which is 9. So you end up getting your answer as a 7/9. And now, because this is negative, well, if you try to put it in your calculator, it'll say error, because you can't square a number to get a negative value. We haven't talked about imaginary numbers yet. See, we're going to say no real solution. There will be a solution later which will be imaginary, but for now that key word here is no real solution. It's not a real number, but it will be imaginary later. And then you can just plug this into your calculator, the square root of 0.81. Well, we already know that the square root of 81 is 9, so we actually are going to get that it's equal to a 0.9. You just have to be careful of where the decimal is going to go. And here, you can just plug this into your calculator, and I'll go ahead and bring that up for you. So we have a negative 34 plus 12 that's being divided by a negative 3, and it's being multiplied by 5. And so my answer here is a negative 54. So I'm going to go ahead and say that this answer is a negative 54. So for problem number B, we want to make sure we deal with that negative 2 to the 4th power. So we do that, and we know it's going to be a negative because the negative is not inside the parentheses. So we know that this part right here is going to turn into a negative 16. So 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. So 2 to the 4th is equal to 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, which ends up being 4 times 4, and 4 times 4 is 16. And remember, you have the negative there, so it's a negative 16. So I still have a plus 4, absolute value of 18 minus 24. So the next thing that we want to do is do this subtraction. See, we want to see 18 minus 24. So now I'm going to have a negative 16 plus 4, the absolute value, and 18 minus 24 is a negative 6. Now I'm going to go ahead and make that a green color, so it's a negative 6. So now what we want to do is we want to deal with the absolute value. So I'm going to have a negative 16 plus 4. And this absolute value here is, well, it's 6, negative 6 from the 0 on the number line. So negative 6, what's the distance from 0? That's 6. So now what you have is you have a negative 16 plus 4. And note, don't forget that it's being multiplied by 6. So a negative 16 plus, and 4 times 6 is actually 24. So now you just add negative 16 plus 24, and that is going to give you a positive 8. So that would be your final answer for part B. Okay, so now for part C, again, we can either do this in our calculator or we can do this by hand. We know that this negative 5 squared, well, that's going to turn into a positive 25. Now I have a minus 8, and inside the brackets I have 4 minus, and here I'm going to do the 6 plus 3. So then 6 plus 3 is going to give you 9. And you have minus, and here I'm going to have the square root of 36. And the square root of 36 is 6. So now I have 25 minus 8 minus 6. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to deal with this. I'm going to deal with that 4 minus 9. Because 4 minus 9 is actually negative 5. So that negative 8 and that negative 5 are going to be multiplied together. So I'm going to have a 25. If I have negative 8 times a negative 5, that's going to give me a positive 40. So you want to make sure that you say plus 40, and you have a minus 6. So now with your calculator, you can do 25 plus 40 minus 6, and your final answer there is going to be a 59. So 59 will be your final answer. Now you want to make sure that you can do part D, and again you can use your calculator if you want. Now that I have resized my calculator, what we can do is I'm going to have my parentheses, and I'm going to go ahead and put in my fraction. So I'm going to go to alpha y equals, and that way I can put in my fraction. So I have a -1, and then down at the bottom I'm going to have a 4, and it's to the power. And remember that power button is right above the division sign right here. So that's the power to the 3rd power, okay? And now I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of it. So it's going to be a minus, or actually, let's just do one thing at a time. So if I have that -1/4 to the 3rd power, I'm going to get a -1 over 64. So I just dealt with this. So now the next part, I want to deal with this addition part. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up my calculator again. And so I'm going to have and I guess it's a subtraction. So actually, let's just leave that there. So I'm going to have my parentheses, and it's my fraction. And I have a 1/2 plus my fraction of 3/8. And so I get 7/8. So I'm going to have that as a 7/8. And don't forget that you had this as a subtraction, so it's still a subtraction. And you still have your division. And so your division, you have 48 divided by 3. I'm going to try to see if I can reduce that. Well, if I have 48 being divided by 3, I end up getting a positive 16. So now I know that this part in here, since I reduced it, is going to be a square root of 16, because 48 divided by 3 is 16. So now from here, I can put this all into my calculator. So I'm going to have my fraction, and that's a -1 over 64 minus my fraction of 7/8. And I have the division, and the division is going to be the square root of 16. And the square root of 16 is 4, but that's okay if we just put it in there. The calculator will do it for you. Because here, remember, the division is stronger, so you would actually have to do division first and then that subtraction. But your calculator kind of already does that for you. And looks like that answer is -15/64. And so that will be my final answer. Now looking at part E, again, I can just put all of this into my calculator, which is really nice. And you guys are always allowed to use a calculator. So I have 5 parentheses -6, and I have -2 to the 3rd power. Oops. So just to make sure, the numerator is 5 times -6 minus 2 to the 3rd power. And down at the bottom, I have 3 parentheses 7, and it's -2. And so really nice thing about these calculators is that you can just put it in, and it'll spit out the answer. And so I'm going to have my final answer here as a -2. So my final answer here would be a -2. And that is the end of this section. So I hope this helps. Thank you guys.